You know, the 2000s had a lot of, yes, there is that, uh, a lot of horror remakes. Halloween, Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Prom Night, and in 2006 came When a Stranger Calls. So there was this whole thing where creativity was sort of at an all-time low in Hollywood, especially in the horror genre, and people were wanting to just sort of bank off old names, and movies like When a Stranger Calls weren't considered classics way back when. The original was in black and white, and I've actually never seen the original, and I got to see the remake many years ago. It's probably back in 2008 or so, and I was still very new to the horror genre. And I was only 15 or 16 at the time, and my parents had just started letting me watch scary stuff, and it was sort of my entryway into the slasher slash thriller part of horror movies. So I hadn't watched Psycho, I hadn't watched Nightmare on Elm Street or Halloween at that point yet. So When a Stranger Calls was probably my first slasher slash thriller film, if you will. And it's rated PG-13, and the film is directed by Simon West, and it stars Camelia Bell. It's got Clark Gregg, and yeah, and you know who else is in it, but is extremely, his talent shows because he never actually appears on film. He voices the stranger over the phone, Lance Henriksen, and I joke you not, somebody else plays the stranger, and Lance plays him, calling over the phone as sort of his, the ghost face voice, and he's so chilling and intimidating over the phone. The fact that he doesn't physically appear in the film, but yet you feel the acting presence and genius just through his voice says a lot about him. And honestly, I've had a soft spot for this film, and maybe it is because it was my first, thriller film, as I said before. And I actually quite like it. I've still never seen the original. I know in the original, basically the whole premise of this movie is that the main character, her name is Jill, she's had a bad breakup, and which caused her to make a bad decision, and she went 800 minutes over her cell phone limit. And it sounds like a very teenager thing, but she is a teenager in high school in the film, and as punishment, her father is having her babysit to sort of earn the money back, and she's been banned from her cell phone, and that's kind of how they get the writers get her to not have a cell phone when she's all the way out kind of in the middle of nowhere. And so she's just kind of like this, and Camelia Bell plays this role very well. I thought that she did a terrific job, and I rewatched it recently with my writer's eyes. I haven't seen the movie in probably about 6 years or so. It'd been quite a while, so I was curious to see if I still felt the same way about it. And I think it's underappreciated, and I think the reason it got such bad reviews on initial release is because the trailer shows everything. I mean, it gives away so much of the surprise in the film, and I watched it without ever seeing a single trailer for it. The only thing that I had seen was the poster, and the poster is just it's Jill's hand with the cell phone, and the little icon picture is just her screaming, and I thought that was a very powerful image. And so I went into the film not knowing any of the twists, which the trailer gives away, and having watched the trailer after seeing the movie, so I could understand why people went into the movie, and it's like they were just like, well, we saw all this already, all the surprise is gone. And it just goes to show that a trailer can really make or break a movie. So it's hard to show all the interesting parts, and I feel like even the opening, the opening could have been the trailer itself. I feel like that if they had, the opening is brilliant because it shows the killer's, one of the killer's victims through like a credit scene, and I feel like that in itself could have been the trailer. Like I feel like that would have been so much better because it doesn't actually show anything within the core story other than setting up the murderer himself. And I think that the film, it could be boring to some. It's definitely a slow burn. It doesn't start picking. It starts picking up within like 45 to 50 minutes of the film, but it starts laying groundwork for all the things that are going to happen. And it's like every time there's a phone call, things escalate just a tiny bit. It's minuscule, but it's like once it hits the 40-minute marker, and and Jill starts realizing, hey, this guy's being a major creep, and she starts getting the police involved, and of course she's kind of out in the middle of nowhere. So it's not like she has anyone to help her out, and the only people that are in the house with her are the kids. And that was another weird thing, was you hardly ever see the kids until like the climax, and the whole excuse is that they're sick. And I actually, so I mind it in the sense that you don't get to really see the kid's face until like the big chase sequences at the end. But at the same time, kid actors in horror films aren't notoriously great. Like they don't really have a whole lot of lines in the movie, so maybe that was for the better. And Camelia Bell really carries the film on her own, because I'd say 80% of the movie is her going through the house, and the house is a character within itself. And I think that really is what makes the film suspenseful, is how the director shoots it, and that there are visual cues that sort of show up that are important later on in the movie, and there's competent camera movement throughout the movie. So I was able to notice this more this time around, and I think that the way he shoots it going around corners, and the way that he shoots various rooms and angles, and all the art that is on the wall inside of this house. Again, this house is very, very interesting and very visually pleasing. It's almost the best character in the film, and I think that's important because 90% of the film takes place inside this house, and the house is beautiful. It's a house that you could see yourself wanting to be in, but yet there's this terrible event that's about to go down inside of it, which the fact that it's a terrible thing taking place in a beautiful place, I think is very, very interesting and visually pleasing. Overall, I think When a Stranger Calls, I would recommend it to those that are kind of curious about either the horror or slasher genre. If you've got again, the movie is rated PG-13. So it's like if you're not into horror films, but let's say you're kind of curious about them, but aren't wanting to have the bejesus scared out of you, or aren't wanting to see a whole lot of gore, then I think 2006's When a Stranger Calls would be a good start for you. Just kind of get into it, and then it's like if you wanted to, you could elevate to movies like Psycho, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Friday the 13th, and there's not. I think that the movie is underappreciated, and it's one of the better remakes. It's not perfect by any means. It's got a lot of flaws. It's slow in some parts, and it's a good movie, but it's not great. I'll admit I have a soft spot for it because it was a movie that I watched early on in my exposure to horror films, and I think that the film does a lot to do with having callbacks to movies like Psycho. Like there are musical cues that sound like something that would be out of Hitchcock, and I'm sure that's on purpose, because I think that Simon West is definitely a fan of Alfred Hitchcock, as is everybody in the horror film genre should be. But yeah, it's a harmless watch. It's one of those things where it's like if you're not into slow burn horror films at all, like if you were bored by Psycho, you're going to definitely be bored with When When a Stranger Calls. Have you seen 2006's When a Stranger Calls? I still haven't seen the original, and I know that the original, basically the attack in the house occurs in the first 20 minutes, and then the rest of the film is her trying to get over it. At least that's what I've heard. Have you seen the original or this remake? What did you think of either of them? What's your favorite horror remake? Let's try to keep it positive. It's like there's some good ones out there. They're not all garbage like Poltergeist. Comment below. Let me know if you like what you see. Subscribe to see more. You can check out my books on Amazon. Bye.